Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here this evening. I appreciate your participation. And as I explained, Washington traffic is unpredictable, so this is the cream of the crop, and so this is a good crowd for me and for all of us. I'm a member of the Arts Club of Washington, and happily so. I also want to thank my president, Henry Sinkowitz. Will you stand up, please? He has been an incredible support for this function. We started talking about it nearly a year ago. And so, Henry, thank you very, very much. I also want to introduce Rosendo Ramos, who's the director of the Lakeview High School Mariachi program. If you would stand up, thank you very much. And a really special friend to me and to the mariachis is Dr. Carl Deathloff, who is here with his wife. And he is an incredible support factor in San Angelo, Texas for the mariachi program. And then, of course, we have the mariachis. And we have, as I call your names, if you could just briefly stand. Isaac, where are you? Isaac is a terrific trumpet player. I think some of you heard him last night. Dakota Severe. Where's Dakota? There you go. All right, and then Gabriel Gómez. There's Gabriel Vihuela. Then you also have Darren Anthony. Okay, and then we have Willie Rodriguez. Okay, and then a really close friend of mine and a friend to the ambassador and now to Gloria and Henry and others in the Arts Club, Rene Alvarado, who is an artist from San Angelo, Texas, and again, a terrific asset for this evening. Some of his paintings are on display in not only in this room, but around the area. And it sort of rounds out the evening's list of who's who's. After the panel has concluded, I would like for you all to join us in the back in the garden area for some hors d'oeuvres, cocktails, and music by the mariachis. So with that, as an introduction, we're here against the backdrop of President Monroe's home, and we're here to have a conversation about our commonalities, not only as Hispanics, but as Americans with ancestral linkages to many countries beyond the Americas. For those of us who are Latino or Hispanic, our familial ties to Europe are of long standing, so it's a special treat and honor for me to have the ambassador of the European Union here this evening, and I'll tell you more about him in a bit, Ambassador Stavros Lambrinidis, who is also my neighbor. So I'm glad he's here to help us out. Europe's interest in Hispanics is noteworthy to me because in some of my research I've discovered that as developing world migrants enter Europe and as European countries struggle to cope with their change in demographics, they're looking at the United States to see how the United States is incorporating its own new arrivals and its own new citizens and residents. So we are, I guess, a case study for the Europeans, and that is probably a good thing, I hope. But the European interest in Hispanics goes far beyond demographics and social politics. It extends to the realm of culture. For example, the National Catholic reported that there are conferences held on Chicano literature in Ireland and Spain, and Germany's University of Heidelberg offers a BA degree in Ibero-American literary traditions with a focus on Hispanic studies. How about that? Now, there's also an interest from the European perspective, and we'll say for now our cousins, an interest in Hispanics or Latinos as a multidimensional economic powerhouse, which is growing. According to some sources, and you can find different sources, but according to some sources, Latino purchasing power is approaching $3 trillion. As a standalone economy, it would be the 7th largest economy in the world with a GDP that's higher than India, Brazil, and Italy. How's that for some impressive numbers? Equally noteworthy, Hispanics are a growing political force. Consequently, I think Europe understands that it's good business and it's good diplomacy to engage with Hispanics because they are a political and economic change agent or change agents in the United States. Yet, I firmly believe that all Americans are change agents. And as such, that was sort of the fountain that led to me coming to tonight's theme, from picking crops to cultivating minds. And in particular, this theme came to me because I was watching the media, like many of you in this room were over the past many months, and watching Americans taken to the streets in utter frustration and angry at the certain aspects of life in the United States and political representation and the economic climate in this country. And so I think these are frustrations that are perhaps best dealt with by building coalitions across political party lines and racial spheres to reduce economic disparities and to promote the attainment of higher education for all Americans. And as stewards of this country, we need opportunities to advance from the menial to the meaningful. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at a point where, as Americans, as we're prone to do, always come to the time for thinking things over, to the singing of our songs, to the sharing of our life stories. And this evening, we will hopefully be talking things over as Americans rather than as distant neighbors in our own country. I am honored to introduce to you tonight our panelists, and they are, and I'll start with Arturo Rodriguez, who is the President Emeritus of the United Farm Workers Union. Mr. Rodriguez led the United Farm Workers Union in bringing about meaningful change for farm workers by making it easier for them to organize and negotiate union contracts. He sought to fundamentally transform American agriculture by creating jobs, offering workers decent pay, comprehensive health coverage, retirement security, protections against toxic pesticides, and guarantees against discrimination and sexual harassment. Today, Mr. Rodriguez is the President Emeritus of the United Farm Workers, providing support to the union and continuing to fight for immigrant rights in the Congress of the United States. Noteworthy is that Arturo, who didn't know me from Sam Adams, was the first person that accepted my invitation to be on the panel this evening. It was a cold call that I made because I had been impressed by his organization's work and by him and by Mr. Cesar Chavez. So, Arturo, I'm not going to forget that kindness. Second, we have Fin Gómez. I came to know Fin Gómez through the ambassador. Fin Gómez is a White House producer for CBS News. He has covered 3 presidential campaign cycles, and in 2016, he was named as one of the most influential in news by Mediate for his work covering the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign. He is a proud member of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists and the first Latino journalist to serve on the White House Correspondents Association in its 105th year of existence. He serves as secretary of the association. That's impressive. The association is a 9-member executive board elected by correspondents and represents the membership on issues relating to access to the commander-in-chief coverage and matters related to press travel to accompany a president on the road. No small job. Then we have Mercedes Garcia Perez. She's the head of global issues and innovation at the Delegation of the European Union. Her office represents the EU in the areas of climate, energy, and environment, transportation, research, innovation, public health, and food safety. A lawyer by training, Mercedes has practiced EU competition and trade law in Brussels. Equally important to those of us who are members of this club, she is a visual artist who has exhibited her work in Belgium and has works in private collections in Belgium, Dubai, Morocco, Spain, and the United States. Mercedes is a board member of the Board of Alliance for the New Music Theater in Washington, D.C. We then have, on that end, Dr. Enrique Figueroa, Professor Emeritus of the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee, a former Agricultural Marketing Services Administrator at USDA. And a little tidbit about Enrique, long ago, when we were both much younger, he was my intern when I was Chief of Staff at the Committee of Agriculture of the House of Representatives. So I think I can say I've literally seen him grow into his current position. Enrique obtained his doctorate in American Agricultural Economics from UC Davis, as well as 2 other master's degrees. He was a professor at Cornell University, where one of his research efforts was to be a member of a group of professors at land-grant universities that wrote a book entitled Immigration Reform in U.S. Agriculture. During the second Clinton administration, he was a presidential appointee to the USDA, first as administrator of the Agricultural Marketing Service, and later promoted to Deputy Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs. He was recruited and served as the director of the Roberto Hernandez Center at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, from which he retired in 2018. He has and continues to serve on numerous local, state, and national boards, commissions, and committees. Finally, we have Aida Hernandez Flores. She's Clinical Operations Manager at Capital Laser and Skin Care. The interesting thing about Aida is that she is an emerging businesswoman. She is a native of Tarija, Bolivia, and immigrated to the United States when she was 6 years old. She is now the director of her family vineyard, and her dream is to export their product to America. Aida comes from a long line of public servants or people with concern for others. Her grandfather, Rodolfo Flores, was a pillar of the community, founding and maintaining several schools for the financially challenged in Bolivia. Aida is financially responsible for the development of the family business. Her dream is to carry on her grandfather's legacy by helping others. And now we come to my neighbor, or as he is formally known, the Ambassador of the European Union to the United States of America.
His Excellency the Ambassador.
I stand correct. His Excellency El Supremo. Anyway, this is a conversation that His Excellency, my neighbor, and I had a long time ago, and he stated, and I agreed, that it was impossible to have a panel dealing on these lofty topics without an appropriately accredited panel moderator. And I of course, said, well, that can only be you. And he agreed, and so he's here. He has studied economics and political science at Amherst College. Got a Bachelor of Arts degree there in 1984. He graduated magna cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa. He graduated from Yale Law School in 1988, where he was also managing editor of the Yale Journal of International Law. He has worked as an attorney at Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering in Washington, D.C., specializing in international trade transactions and arbitration. He has served as the European Union's Special Representative for Human Rights. He has served as the Foreign Affairs Minister of Greece, and he was twice elected member of the European Parliament with the Greek Social Democratic Party. In addition, he served as Vice President of the European Parliament, Vice President of the Civil Liberties, Justice, and Home Affairs Committee, and head of the PASOK delegation. He was Director General of the International Olympic Truce Center and an International Olympic Committee Olympic Committee organization. He served as ambassador ad personam of the Hellenic Republic, Secretary General of the Greek Foreign Ministry, and responsible for expatriate Greeks, and Chief of Staff to the Greek Foreign Minister. Mr. Ambassador, Your Excellency, take it away.
Thank you, Mario. What an inspiring introduction. I mean, you speculated on the European Union's particular interest in engaging with, in approaching the Hispanic Latino American community. And you're absolutely right. There's a great interest. And I have to tell you all, because you also mentioned my role in a very previous life of dealing with diaspora Greeks, that, you know, if you're a European here in the country, you have many ties with the people of your own community, of your own old country back in Europe. The Greeks here are a very big community. The Spaniards are, the Irish, et cetera, et cetera. And in many ways, the European Union tended to identify the United States very often through those people and those connections with European roots in the country. And the fact of the matter is that it became very clear to me when I arrived in this country that if you really want to engage with the United States, this is just simply not the way to do it, or certainly not the most important way to do it. The Hispanic Latino community is supremely powerful economically, politically. It is coming up in numbers. It is the cultural affinity that Europeans feel to the community here is probably unparalleled. And we saw that yesterday also in the way that the fantastic mariachi band was playing so many songs, and you had a bunch of European Union people in the house just singing and dancing. I mean, it was just, it's obvious that to them, that was just obviously their own culture as well. Huh? So I'm really, really honored and thankful, Mario, for not just our friendship, but the fact that you asked me to moderate this panel. So as we speak, in town today is the European Union's Secretary of State, Josep Borrell from Spain, and two other European Union ministers, secretaries. So I have personally a relatively hard stop at 7:10, so we'll just kick off the discussion. And so honored to have this remarkably rich diversity of people around me. And thank you for describing this matter. So jumping in immediately. Each one of you, opening question, what would you say were the key milestone experiences in your life that got you where you are today? What element or part of those are tied to your Hispanic Latino identity? What elements are not? How were all your different parts of identities combined in bringing you where you are today? Sounds like a complex question. Maybe it's easy. I don't know. But I will ask you all to be epigrammatic, to use a Greek word. So state the main influence that you feel identified you, and then we can jump into a discussion among you about this as well. I really don't know how you want me to go around the table. I suppose I could start with Arturo, since you introduced him first. Arturo, please, what answer can you possibly give to this easy question?
Well, thank you, Ambassador. It's also an honor and a privilege to be here with you and with all the other distinguished guests that we have here today. But in 1972, I was in graduate school at the time, and all of us Latinos, Hispanic students from throughout the country came together, and one thing that kind of united us all was the issue of farm workers that were fighting during that particular period of history and had begun their struggles about 10 years before that. And the man at the head of the organization, Cesar Chavez, we were convinced that we wanted to bring him to campus. First time ever, he coming to University of Michigan, and it was the first time that any, for that matter, Hispanic or Latino of his stature was going to be coming to the university. And so we were out there raising money and everything else. And when he came, I had never met him personally, just seen him on TV. And here was a 5'5" gentleman, very small hands. And he came, and he's representing this movement that had started in this country that all of us were so much engaged in at the time, participating in boycotts and marches and protests and on and on and on. And the simpleness of his presence. I mean, he came in with a plaid shirt. He didn't have a fancy car to come up and bring him there. When he spoke with sincerity and very genuine. And he talked about an issue that nobody would talk about in this country, and that was farm workers and the women and the men that fed us every day, and yet they oftentimes didn't have enough food on their own tables. So when I saw that and got a chance to hear him and participate in the activities in terms of bringing him there, it really had an impact on me. And shortly afterwards, his brother Richard Chavez began talking to me and lured me into the organization by saying, why don't you just come and work for 6 months, Arturo? And I said, oh yeah, 6 months, that's nothing. So 6 months became 48 years. And so, but it was that moment in my life that I really realized that this is the way that I wanted to make a contribution. Working on behalf of farm workers, working with farm workers, because of the presence and the the integrity that Cesar Chavez had.
That's brilliant. So the integrity and the humility of the person, in addition to what he believed in or what he did,
That's right.
is what drew you in.
You know, I mean, I think it was, first of all, he was fighting on behalf of the poorest of the poor in our country, farm workers. The majority, well, not the majority, but the overwhelming group was all African Americans, a small population of African Americans, Filipinos, some Asians working in the workforce still, but primarily of Mexican descent, of Latino descent. And, you know, it just really impacted me. And we had folks within our family that had participated, and I was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas. And so lots of folks came from the Rio Grande Valley and were part of the migrant stream. And so as a result, I saw Cesar as really wanting to do something to lift up the stature of those women and those men that made sure that there was food on our tables every single day. And I think that's what attracted me and got me to stay with the organization. Because when you get engaged, I mean, you really see the fact that people want just what everybody else has, nothing more. They just want to have the same opportunities. They want to be treated equal. They want to be treated with respect and dignity. And that really made a lot of sense to me.
Brilliant. Thank you. Finn, by the way, I say Arturo, Finn. My name is Stavros. No, your excellencies and stuff like that. So you call me Stavros, please.
Okay.
Finn, your influence, what brought you here?
Well, Your Excellency Stavros. I will say that, first of all, let me just take just a moment to step back here for a second and say that I'm honored to be on this panel. Like, just to see these tremendous human beings next to me who accomplished so much and who are accomplishing so much. My father, when he was a teenager, marched with Cesar Chavez, and just for you to talk to him and know, I mean, and you're Arturo Rodriguez, it's an honor. And you know, interestingly enough, when I cover the White House, as was mentioned, the first day that Biden was in office, there was in the first poll spray where the press go into the Oval Office and they shoot the video, and then the president signs some documents and he says a couple words. You know, everybody was focused on that, of course. When we were watching the video play out, there was this bust behind the president, and I looked, and I immediately noticed, like, that's Cesar Chavez. That's Cesar Chavez, the bust of Cesar Chavez. And I walked into one of the principal deputy press secretary, and I was like, is that Cesar Chavez behind the president? And she looked up, she's like, yes, it's a new day. And that was it. And someone else had thought it was Eleanor Roosevelt, but they were awfully wrong. And another example why representation matters, in my opinion. Your Excellency Stavros, Your Excellency. Truly, for me, my identity is defined and comes from my family, mi familia, who worked so hard, like passionately, for like what they've accomplished, to give me opportunities. I mean, truly, on both sides. You know, my mother was an immigrant from El Salvador who came here at 18 years old looking for a better life. My dad and her, they met at a LULAC meeting here in Washington, D.C. My Latino identity is defined by my family. To the point, like every aspect of who I am is defined through them, through the prism of who they are and what they implemented in me and the legacy they left within me that we also have to pass on to the generations behind us. However, there was this moment where it was like that identity was truly sort of crystallized. And that was when I worked so hard to get to the White House. I really did. It was a little bit harder, I felt, to me than some others. But I walked in those White House grounds, and it was this moment. And you know, I'm a crier. I cry sometimes. I get emotional. I'm just going to throw it out there, all right? But I walked on the White House grounds, and I just looked down at my feet, and I could just sense my abuelita. I could sense like the millions of steps that came behind me to get me to that place. You know, my grandfather was a janitor, you know, in an airport who raised 12 kids. You know, carpenters and teachers were in my family. Their family were migrant workers, you know, at 14 years old. And here I was representing them on the White House grounds. That, to me, I never felt more Latino or more proud of my Latino Hispanic roots than that moment when I was there. That defined my Latino identity in that moment.
That's fantastic. It's so interesting because you both were inspired by a family. You were inspired by a broader family of those peoples on the farms. You were inspired by, your very immediate family, but in both cases there's a sense of belongingness that made definition. Mercedes, in your case?
I really had an amazing experience coming to this country. I've worked for the European Union for many years, for most of my adult life. And, in Europe, I'm just Spanish, that's it. And then coming here, I suddenly became part of a much wider and richer community, which is a community of language. And that, suddenly I become part of this larger Hispanic community. And it's been really a gift to come here. And when you talk about your abuela, that's, for example, one of the things beyond language that I think really unites the Latino identity. I also get emotional talking about my abuela and about my family and how they fought to give me the best education they could and let me go away at a very early age because I really wanted to work for the European Union and go abroad. And there's a beautiful say by Federico Garcia Lorca who says, "A Spaniard who hasn't been to the Americas doesn't know what he or she is," and that's exactly it. When I first set foot in this country, when I was much younger, I went to San Agustin, and I frankly hadn't realized from Spain how important San Agustin was being one of the oldest, actually the oldest city that has continuously been inhabited in the United States, and I keep bumping into so many places with Spanish heritage and so many people I can relate to, and it's beautiful. And the last thing I want to say is another thing that really impressed me growing up is my grandmother brought me to Venezuela, where we have family as well. And a lot of people talk about the immigration into this country, but there was a real generous intake of Spaniards who had to leave after 1936, after the Civil War, and in the early years of the post-war period, because Spain was very poor and we needed to go abroad to work. And a lot of people were really welcome in Colombia, in Venezuela, in Cuba, in Puerto Rico, in Mexico. And part of my family went to Venezuela and did very well there. So it was really, really nice to discover that part of my identity too.
Brilliant. Enrique.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. Mario, gracias for organizing this. What I'm going to describe is an event that contemporaneously did not affect me, but it manifested itself in my formative years and has since been manifesting itself in how I've done things. There was a gentleman named Lorenzo Briones Figueroa that was born in San Antonio, and he was drafted into World War II, and he chose not to go. So he went back to Mexico, where my father's family is from, and my father said, "I'll go in your place." So my father's blood name is Enrique Terrazas, so he came to the U.S. as Lorenzo Figueroa.
Wow.
Served in the U.S. Army for 3.5 years in the Pacific, married my mom. They established their home in Uvalde, Texas, little town. And then, as some of you may know, in the Eisenhower administration, there was Operation Wetback in 1955 and 1956. And my father was busted for being in this country under fraudulent terms. And that injustice, that, as I mentioned to you earlier, that manifested itself later in my formative years, is the overarching event that has led me to do the things that I've done. In Spanish, we say, me dio las ganas de hacer the things that we've done. Particularly how you affect policy. This was official U.S. policy that deported both legal and illegal Mexicans from our country in 55 and 56. So as a consequence of that, as the Chicano movement began, as the United Farm Worker movement began in the late 60s, early 70s, I was part of that. Because we as Chicanos, in essence, knew that we had to address the injustices in our country. And how is it that that empowers us? And how is it that that gives us vision? And how is it that we gain power and influence in battling, winning some battles, losing other battles, obviously? But it gives you a roadmap on how to move forward. And one of those things is that I've always had the inclination is that I'm not going to be here forever, so I have to train people to pick up the mantle, however he or she wants to do it. But with the vision of saying, I need to address these injustices in our country. Chicanos, by definition, are Americans. Chicanos don't exist anywhere else other than America. And as Mario said earlier, the Europeans, I have friends that used to teach at Heidelberg University in Chicano studies, that even though there's a lot of literature and there's a lot of Chicano art and stuff, we are Americans by definition.
Excellent. Aida, you come from a different path that people hear, and perhaps even from a different generation. Many of these experiences were probably not there when you were developing your own personality. So what is it that has influenced you in your life?
Well, it actually started with my grandfather, and I am very honored to be here with you all. I can't even believe I'm sitting next to all you amazing people, and hope to one day reach the level you guys are. So thank you so much for having me, Mario, and thank you, Your Excellency. But it did start with my grandfather and my grandparents, and they were both educators, and they wanted to make a big difference in our small town in Tarija. And so they created the first school in Calamuchita. In Bolivia, there's no public school, so most of them you paid for. And they really wanted to make sure that the lower class had the opportunity to go to school. And so they built this school, and both of them would teach in their free time, and then they had volunteer teachers from the schools that they worked at to give these kids these opportunities. Most of the kids would go on to work in fields generation after generation, so they actually got the opportunity to get out of changing their routes for the future. And my parents immigrated to the United States when I was only 5 years old. And it was a little hard. You know, my parents would work double jobs, so I wouldn't really get to see them all the time. And I was really raised by my 14-year-old sister. But I saw how hard they were working, and they were both entrepreneurs. My mom started her company after saving and saving for years. My dad was actually a chauffeur at the Bolivian embassy and was held the longest member in the embassy ever, in the Bolivian embassy. So that allowed us to stay in the United States. And that made me want to follow my grandparents' dream to hopefully in the future go back home and create more schools to help these communities that don't have the chance that I was lucky to have. And this is actually the Medal of Honor that my grandfather received. It's equivalent to the Medal of Freedom here in the United States.
Oh, wow.
So he received it for education, and I'm just very proud of that. So I hope to in the future, now that I've invested in my family's vineyard, to the profits that come from that I'm able to follow their dreams and my dreams.
That's really fantastic, and it also allows us to pivot a little bit when you look at the Latino community in the United States. One of the things that I do notice, as Mario mentioned, is how long it's traveled in relatively few years from fighting for basic rights to being an economic superpower in many ways, including through millions of small and medium businesses that are created around, but also some powerhouse businesses. And in some ways, I wonder how that move has also affected the way that the Latino American community approaches politics itself. I hear every day about how it's a major political power and developing political power. But of course, the diversity in the community is huge. It would be rather strange to claim that it can be a monolithic approach. So if I may ask you a little bit, in a random order, I suppose I can go this way now, or in your case, when you think of the main issues that concern you in your daily lives, including political issues today, what would be the three biggest issues be? Would immigration, in your case, be a major political issue today, given the fact that this is the defining story of your life? Or has it given way to other issues? So when one thinks of the political influence of the Latino community here in the country, bringing it down to the personal, what are your main priorities when it comes to that? Do you want to start?
Sure. I'm an economist, but my focus has been more on demographics. And the number one issue, as far as I'm concerned, and I think is supported by research that the Pew Hispanic Center does, which is headquartered here in Washington, is education. Quality of education, access to education, and the cost of education. Latinos in our country are graduating, this is changing in the last 2 or 3 years, had lower graduation rates than African Americans from high school. Most of the country does not know that, okay? The second issue is access to quality jobs that have an opportunity for upward mobility so that people can invest time and effort with the return on that investment. The third thing that I would say is that we as a community are, for the most part, nothing against my media person here, but the American mainstream media has ignored us. If you look at how we are viewed, how we're presented, how we exist, the 64 million of us in this country today, as compared to the 46, 47 million African Americans in our country, you would think that the African American community is 2 or 3 or 4 times bigger than us. We simply do not have a presence in the mainstream media. So those are the 3 things that I think are guiding myself and, in my judgment, what Latinos in our country are looking for.
Finn, I mean, it's a pass to you.
Yeah, I would say, I would say that I think industry-wide, it's improved, especially since like when I started, let's say, and not that long ago, and it has. There was Congressman Castro. He spearheaded this great GAO report on how now that even though there were close to 20% of the population in the United States, we're still way underrepresented in the media workforce. That's across all media. That's entertainment as well, especially not just journalism or TV news, let's say. But it's representative, and it's a microcosm, if you will, of the lack of representation. And to me, there has to be overall a better job of appealing to more Latinos, Hispanics, Latinx workers, journalists into the fold. There has to be a better job on that front. And by doing so, again, like what I said, like representation matters. Now, I am the first Latino on the WHCA board, the White House Correspondents Association board, in 107 years. 107 years. How? How is that possible? I thought in the 1970s this would have been done. That would have been a good time to do it, or earlier. It's been around for 107 years, and that's happened. And it's great. Now we're doing some changes, we're doing some things. But that's why I think that the way to, at least in my opinion, the solution could be a simple one: appeal to more. Let's get more. And that's why, for me, to turn around. After I accomplish anything, after I get to any point in my life, in my career, is to turn around and see who I can pull up with me. Because that is a responsibility that we all have in doing so. And I think that is a good remedy.
Arturo, top 3 political priorities in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with what Enrique said and certainly what Fini said. But I think in addition, we can't ignore the issue of immigration. It really has a tremendous negative impact on us in the sense that we have this tremendous number of folks, Enrique said 54 million, somewhere between 54 and 60 million, but 20% of that population today are not American citizens. We don't have legal status in this country. And so when you have that significant of a population that doesn't have rights, doesn't have the same opportunities, as Enrique mentioned, doesn't have access to quality jobs or whatever, and they're surrounded by this climate of fear, then we can't really begin to do what we want and have the kinds of impacts that we want here in this country. And so as a result, we got to deal with that issue. That's something I've had the opportunity to work on for the last 21 years in relationship to farm workers. And it's been so close, so many different times, and yet you sit here and wonder, what is the problem? Why can't we get this thing resolved? You know, what are the forces that are keeping us from getting immigration reform in our country? The last one's in 1986, 30-something years ago. It's about time. And so I'm in total agreement with education, jobs, the economy, the media, and so forth. But I think this is one of the major issues that we as a community, we need to figure out and we need to deal with it.
Can I just add one
Yeah,
word? The Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, okay, the last major piece of legislation, comprehensive, one word in that piece of legislation, knowingly. Employers who knowingly hire undocumented workers are liable. People show up with Social Security numbers, give it to you, they employ you. I didn't know anything. That one word has translated into what Arturo has just said.
Aida, your generation doesn't care about politics, right? Right, obviously. But assuming it did.
Well, I think mainly the prejudice and racism that Latinos do get to encounter. I believe that's why a big part of that is job equality. But I do agree with all the three topics that.
Have you in your
Take ahead.
life, and as you try to set your business or your parents, have they faced direct racism, let's say?
Yes. My mother suffered from racism when she first came into the United States. With her first job, it was actually really bad. And then I've had encounters like taking trips onto going to the beach, just people commenting or saying very uncomfortable things. And then I also experienced it a little bit in school through a coach. So yes, to me that subject and that topic is a little sensitive.
So it's the stereotyping, right? I mean, you always get this.
Mm-hmm.
How do you break it? How do you break that, Mercedes?
I think well, my daughter is lucky to go to a bilingual school where they do half in Spanish and half in English. And what's really refreshing to see is that American parents who don't speak Spanish also want their kids to speak Spanish. So I think there's a huge future, and you know, Americans in general are realizing that the Hispanic culture is important, and that Spanish and learning Spanish is important also for their kids. And I think that there's a lot about creating positive stereotypes, positive models. There's this, my daughter watches this series which is called Diary of a Future President. Don't know if anybody has seen it, but it's basically about this little girl who is in Miami, and she's from a Cuban-American family, and she aspires to become president, and there's this other character who's actually the future president, who sort of appears in the movie. By creating those positive aspirations and those positive models, I think you do a lot for the next generation who can see themselves progressing and, you know, without any limitations. And I think there's a lot that can be done there. And there's been a lot of stereotyping in negative ways of the Latino community. And I think the opposite, doing a lot more of the opposite.
Has any of you found that negative stereotyping, for, at least in some generations? I mean, I'm assuming you agree. If you don't, say that you don't. But have you found that this has moved some of the younger generations or other generations to try to assimilate as fast as possible so they can actually not face that, act like, yes, of course I am Latino, but frankly, I'm just an American, leave me alone? Or is there pride in the Latino identity that is really prevalent there? I mean, how's that played out? Yeah, Finn.
Well, may I just say, yeah, I do believe, like when I was growing up, I think they saw more of this sort of assimilation sort of perspective, like assimilate, become, like the others, if you will. What I see more and more, and speaking to the Generation Z, who are coming up now, is that they have turned the tables. They have gone inward and more focused on cultural identity and more proud of it. And that is something that I think is a really good step, because there were times like growing up where I faced direct racism. I was called wetback. I was called spick to my in high school. To that point, and I used to get in fights with guys who were 6'2", and I was like, I'd probably lose.
And then they would regret it, right?
They would. I think we both regretted it, but they'd stop calling me names. But I think now you see more, at least in what I've seen empirically, you've seen like a difference. And I think that's great. I think it's fantastic. Like, appreciate your identity, appreciate where you're from. Speak Spanish. There are a lot of people. My dad sent me to Spanish school for 9 years every Saturday because he did not want to make me lose that identity.
Your dad did.
My dad did.
Not your mom.
No, my dad. My dad was. And I wanted to go play soccer and watch cartoons, and I'm here going to Spanish school. But what I do, like, I covered Latin America when I was based in Miami. I went all over. And you're right. And there's, I went all over and using that beautiful, beautiful Spanish language.
Yeah.
I've been a university professor most of my professional life, and a lot of Latino students that I would interact with, and I can tell you the number of times I've had Latino students in my office crying because their parents, this is Generation Millennial or Generation X, told them not to speak Spanish. Because if you did, it would be harder for you to accept it in our society. Yep. And they regret that significantly now, okay? The other thing I would say is about 25% of Latinos in our country are monolingual English speakers, 25% are monolingual Spanish speakers. And how is it that we get to 100% bilingual speakers?
Education again.
No, but it's very true what Enrique says, because I just take my own family. And my dad, when he went to first grade, his family migrated here from Mexico. He spoke nothing but Spanish until he got to first grade, and then he was set back a year. So him and my mom both had this mentality that whatever we do, we're going to make sure our children speak English very well so they'll never negatively be impacted in school. Because for them, as you mentioned, education, that was number one. My dad worked several different jobs in order to make sure that all 7 of us got to high school. And my mom took care of everything at home in relationship to that. But because of that, I was the only one that learned Spanish in the family. And I learned it and lost it and learned it and lost it and so forth. None of my brothers and sisters, none of my cousins speak Spanish because of that whole mentality that if you want to get ahead in this country, you got to pronounce all your words right. You can't say, how was it, the
chips,
CH and those types of things, that you had to be very clear in your pronunciation or else you would be fingered as a Hispanic.
So with your siblings, the difference in who speaks Spanish and who doesn't, does that also affect each one of your family's identity, identifying with the Latino American community? Do you feel today different in the way that you approach this because of the difference in the language?
Well, the reality was it became very significant in the sense that we even have Republicans within our family. And growing up, no. I'm sorry, I know it's a neutral situation, but growing up, gosh, we were all so close, cousins and brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and so forth. And I was gone for 45 years during the time that I was working with Cesar Chavez. came home and I said, oh my gosh, what happened? You know, I mean, we were all together, united, and all of a sudden, man, things transpired and changed over the years. And so, yeah, it
So
does.
this is
I
the
mean,
change.
you lose.
This is the change in the country itself, though, isn't it? Or is it the change that came from that initial difference in how integrated each one of you was? And
Well, I think all of us took different directions.
Okay.
We're influenced in different ways, you know, in terms of how we looked at things, how we looked at society, how we looked at politics, how we looked at within our own culture, how we accepted it, and how we were a part of it.
Finn?
Yeah, I also in my family have it's split between Republican and Democrat now, but the younger generations are even going more non-party. You know, it's more you know, independent,
Right.
and it's very you know, which is interesting politically, and I think it touches upon what you said at the beginning, that you know the Latino community overall is not monolithic. We do share, there's certain convergence points that we do agree on. We just do. It just seems that way, and it is that way. But you know, there's diversity even among political thought now, much more, I think, than before. Maybe Doc, he can know a little more about it. But I think that statistically, I think you're seeing that more. I think you're seeing more of that. I mean, you see it obviously in South Florida. You're seeing it more. Even in parts of Texas on the border, like some of them voted for Trump in the Rio Valley, you know, like, so there are these changes politically, and of course, you know, a Cuban American is going to vote differently statistically than even in their own state, than the Puerto Rican community in the Central Florida. So you have to really take all that into account as well to really sort of weigh and scale who we are. Collectively.
Well, I wouldn't be a European Union ambassador worth his salt if I didn't try to bring in the international dimension in this discussion. And fundamentally, my question is, as the Latino community increases in economic power, as it increases in political power in this country, as its cultural influence increases, how do you think that will be affecting the way that the U.S. foreign policy will be unfolding? So in other words, you know, what do you feel the demands of the community will be in terms of U.S. focus in foreign policy? Will it be pulled away from Europe or from Asia and move more to Latin America? Will there be a sense, because of the economic growth, that the country has to focus more on relations that can bring prosperity to this country, because that's what the community will demand, in which case, you know, a focus on the European Union, the number one by far investor and trader with the US than anyone else, might become more prevalent. Is it impossible to predict? So is my question just wrong to begin with? So I don't know. It's just I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in.
I would say that it's nearly impossible to predict, but what I would say is that absent of immigration issue, Mexican Americans are going to influence U.S.-Mexican policy. Colombian Americans are going to influence U.S.-Colombia policy. It's not going to be the Latino community. It's going to be this issue about how we identify from our country of origin and then having an effect on U.S. policy with regards to that country.
Representation matters.
Yeah. No, and it's very true. I mean, just when you look at the remesas, the whole remittance program that exists between our country and Mexico and Nicaragua and Central American countries and so forth, I mean, we are the second largest source of revenue for Mexico. Mexicans that live here in the United States and send money over to their families in Mexico. It was $40 billion last year, $40 billion that's sent over to help families in Mexico. So that has a huge impact economically and what the interests are and the relationships between our country and Mexico and so forth. And I can only imagine as we continue to grow as a population, as more generations continue to live here in the U.S., the ties with Europe is going to become very, very strong because we're like anybody else. We want to travel. We want to have good times. We want to see other countries. And obviously, there's a huge appeal there. So I think, you know, as time goes on, we're going to see more and more of a willingness and a desire to be a part of the bigger world, as opposed to just within what we know.
And look, if I can speculate, actually pride in one's identity, there's always a danger that it gets to become nationalistic, but honest to God, healthy pride in one's identity, in my experience, is the number one prerequisite for someone to actually be able to be more open to the world.
Let me just follow up what Arturo said. I did an analysis of remittances just from the state of Wisconsin, because I'm at the University of Wisconsin, to Mexico about 10 years ago. And it was about $780 million per year that was leaving Wisconsin into Mexico. And then I said, okay, what does that mean? If $780 million would have stayed in the state of Wisconsin, specifically in the Mexican-American community, what economic impact that would have? Now, am I prepared to tell the people that are sending remittances, stop sending money to your mom, stop sending money to your uncle, so forth? No. But that's the conundrum when you have a binational kind of essence.
Yep.
Economically, those dollars that are leaving our country, if they stayed in our communities, would be a significant impact. Will that happen? Probably not.
All right, dear friends, we're coming close to the end, at least to the moment that I have to leave. So, frankly, this is such a remarkable panel. And I'm so pleased to realize that some of you haven't really met before.
None of us today.
That what I want to do in closing is to offer you the moderator's role. So I want you each to ask anyone here in the panel a question that you would like to ask them, any kind of question that you haven't had the opportunity to do so, in your lives up to now, because many times, presumably many of you are just meeting for the first time. I'll start with Mercedes on this. Mercedes, is there any question you want to ask anyone on the panel? Just pick one person, ask one question.
I'll pick Aida because you're the youngest person in the panel. And one thing I've observed is I deal with climate and energy, etc., is that there's a lot of leadership in the young generation among the young people that mobilize around environment and climate that are actually among the Latino community. And I'm thinking of Shilla Bastida and Sotomayor, etc. And is that a thing, or is this anecdotal, something that I'm
Oh, I think it definitely is a thing. I do see. I know. Sorry, the start of the question was.
Is climate, and the fight for a better environment something that motivates the younger Latin generation?
Yep. So I know for me, especially, yes, I definitely feel like there is a lot of climate change, and there are little things we can do to change. I've noticed a lot of my friends changing the way they use plastic and they recycle, and I think we need to prioritize a little bit more on climate change. I don't believe everybody's to the same level or has focused on that subject. So I hope that slowly we are making that change, and more people will take that into account.
All right. Arturo, any question for anyone?
Yeah, Enrique, share with us some of the most recent, demographic data that's coming out, because I know you've spent a lot of your lifetime in research. Just to give us an idea, 2050, what's it going to look like in the next 30 years? And how do you see the community changing and growing?
I'm going to go out on a limb, Arturo, okay?
Okay.
I think in 2050 we'll have 10 Latino governors in our country. We'll have 20 U.S. senators in our country. And we will have, just like we have currently in California, the Latino caucus is the most powerful caucus in the state of California, as you know, Arturo, that the Latino caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives would be the most powerful caucus.
I'm a little concerned about California because there's a Greek who was elected lieutenant governor, Eleni Kounalakis. So can you be nice to her at least?
She's good people. She's very good people. Her father's, they're good folks.
Yeah, Angela is a good guy. But it's interesting because, in fact, when I look at the Greek community, I realize that 10 or 20 years ago, they were focusing very much on voting for Greek candidates for things. And today, whereas this is still a thing, many more of them seem to be comfortable in their skin, but also looking outside of the community. So what you're describing, I think, is a very important trend that will happen probably here as well. A real focus on political empowerment through your own people, and then potentially, eventually, also looking at different kind of candidates. But it's very interesting. What you just said resonates very much with what I've seen here with other communities, honestly.
Remember, I prefaced it by saying I was going out on the limb.
Yeah. All right. Your question, Finn, to whom?
Oh, okay. First, I want to ask Arturo, where did you get your boots, man? Because they're beautiful. Wow. I mean, they're just outstanding boots. I'm so envious. But I actually, can I open up just a little bit to like one answer for each panel, just to one question?
You do whatever you want to.
Okay, quick, 20 seconds. Give me a hard wrap.
Yeah.
But honestly, what I would ask is, do you believe we will see a Latino Hispanic president in the next 15 years?
15?
Yeah, 15 years. To everyone on this panel, yes or no, like one by one, actually. Within the next 15 years, will we see a Latino or Latina president?
15 years, so
15.
So in the fourth election from now,
Yes.
I say no.
no.
Okay.
President or vice president?
President.
President. Unfortunately, probably not.
All right?
I don't believe so, but I hope so.
You believe so?
Yes.
And you hope so?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So the next, okay, so you have
Within-
4 elections.
Yes.
1, 2, 3, and then you have the fourth.
Absolutely. Going on the statistic director alone, I'm going to base it off. I'm going to blame it on you. I'm going to say it's you.
Let me just
You
say,
went on a limb, man.
as Mario knows, Mexican Latino Republicans are increasing,
Yeah.
okay? So that the Latino vote is not going to be similar to the black vote in our country, which is 90% plus Democratic. So for that reason, I think it'll get split.
Interesting. But you nevertheless believe that 20% of the Senate will be,
That was 2050.
that was 2050.
He said 15.
It's in 15
Okay.
years.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so Enrique, your question?
I used to run this program called the Latino Nonprofit Leadership Program. And in the 8-month program, and the participants had to answer 3 simple questions. ¿Quién soy? ¿Cómo soy? ¿Y por qué soy? Who am I? How am I? And why am I?
I am Mercedes. I'm a mother, and I'm a member of the wonderful Hispanic community here in the U.S. Yeah.
Why?
Why? Because I've been lucky enough to be transplanted into a country where there's a community that welcomes me as such.
Brilliant. Aida, you have the last question.
Well, I would like to ask Finn, have you seen an increase in Latinos at the White House?
In terms of journalists?
In terms of journalists, in terms of staff?
Well, yes. Let me just cross the word yes. I have. Yes, just in the last year, yes. There's been a pronounced difference. You see more. Still ways to go. Still a ways to go. Still a ways to go. Like, and shockingly so, in my opinion.
Arturo's daughter has a position at the White House.
Yeah?
Yes, she's Director of Intergovernmental Affairs.
Yes.
Well, let me just say, what a pleasure, what an honor. I am a policy wonk in addition to a diplomat and a politician, so I have to say, when I heard things like the priority of education as a priority, issues like health, issues like economic equality, I couldn't stop but thinking that these are issues, big issues of discussion in this country. In Europe, we have resolved many of these issues through the social system, safety net that we have. During COVID, the poorest people, the minorities, did not die more because they had free health care in place. University education, there's private as well, but in every European country, is public too. I said, talk about healthcare. I didn't know this. It costs about $10,000 per person for governments in Europe to provide universal health care to every European. It costs about $15,000 for the government in the US to provide health care not to every American. So many times I hear all the Europeans, they have all the social stuff, who wants to be like that? Really? Because I'm paying less to make sure that everyone. So you tell me who the good capitalist here is in the end of the day, and who does it right. Isn't it interesting, Mario? We discussed this before. I wonder if there are opportunities to discuss deep policy issues as well within our communities, to see for things that are a challenge here, such as free education, such as healthcare, to look at the growing power of the business community, of the Latino American community, and think, well, if European companies are by far the biggest investors in this country, and by far the biggest traders in this country, and if American companies in Europe make more money in Europe than they do anywhere else in the world by far, how is it that we can bring the business communities together to have that conversation, right? From the highest level to the lowest level. I mean, you deal with the farming community for so many years. Heck, I mean, in Europe, it's such an important, powerful thing. And as we're moving now to green, which Vicente has mentioned, I mean, moving to green has so many elements to it. You need the right semiconductors to be able to have the right machines to be able to allow a farmer to do green right, and that will not just save the planet, it will create millions of new jobs in the semiconductor industry and in the farming industry. It's an entirely different thing. It's an entirely different world, and I would just love, as a European Union ambassador, to have this conversation more. But until next time, thank you very much to everyone, and fantastic to have you here. I'm sorry, I have to go, Mario. If you want to keep this going a little bit and take some questions, you're more than happy to have that. But I have to run.
I appreciate you being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
We'll have time for just a couple of questions. If the panel could stay, thank you very much. First of all, I'm so glad I invited you, but I'm even happier that you accepted, because you all are phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal, and I've gotten to know a little bit about you through this exchange. Enrique and I have been, I guess now, lifelong friends, right? So to meet some new friends is gratifying, and thank you very much for being here. We can take a couple of questions before we move on to refreshments and music. Who would like to ask a question? Oh, I see a mariachi. Okay, you'll have to stand up and state your name, please, and your question, either to the panel as a whole or to an individual.
You sing it?
Yeah, you can sing it.
My name is Willie Rodriguez, and I wanted to ask Dr.
Figueroa.
To get the 100% bilingual language, do you want to have the younger kids to learn the language of Mexican or Spanish in the younger age, around 5th grade through 7th or 8th? That's
The little that I know about bilingual education, the people that do research on bilingual education, how effective it is at different levels of grade, I think that if you become proficient in English and Spanish by the 6th grade, that generally stays with you if you keep practicing it.
You learn to read and write.
Yes, read and write and speak English and Spanish by the 6th grade.
But do you believe that we should have some teachers teach the language of Mexicans in the 5th grade through the 8th?
Timon?
That means yes. Just as a side note, Willie, a long time ago, long before you were a thought from your parents, I was a bilingual education teacher in Colorado City, Texas, kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, and I can tell you absolutely the younger they start, the more proficient you will be, and it will not leave you. Thank you, Willie. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Alex.
Yeah, so I'm Alex Ransky. I'm the congressional liaison for the delegation. My boss is left, actually, luckily. But one of my jobs is to advise him on elections and electoral results and polling course, you listen to the pundits and they say, Texas is going to turn blue, and once it turns blue, then there's never going to be another Republican president. And, the reason why it's turning blue is because of increasing minorities there, mostly Hispanics, swing states like Nevada, Arizona. You guys talked about this a little bit, Joe, that the Hispanic community is not a monolith, and I can understand that completely, that Cuban Americans have much different priorities than, Mexican Americans. But maybe if I just kind of pick your brains a little bit more about that, because I think I think people do really equate maybe the Hispanic community to the Black community in the United States, and how the Black community is so, reliably democratic, whereas, maybe the Hispanic community is more diverse from where they come from, and have different values and different reasons for voting different ways. But it just boggled my mind that I saw so many Latinos voting for President Trump over the last couple cycles, after all the rhetoric and just, racism and, just really things that would, I mean, I'm obviously not Latino myself, but I would think that it would turn me off, and I used to, I'm recovering Republican myself, but, so I don't want to say that I'm not biased or anything, but it's really just astounded me that these races have been as close as they have, and that Latinos have been voting Republican in the numbers that they have, when everyone was kind of thinking the opposite. So I'd like to, get your guys' thoughts on that.
Let me just, at the risk of bringing up a very touchy issue, the Latino community does not favor abortion. The majority of Latinos do not support abortion. And as you know, that's a very difficult issue to deal with. But Trump played it very well in the Latino community. That's number one. Two, Latinos, in my judgment, do not respond to Latinos. They respond to Mexican Americans, they respond to Cuban Americans, they respond to Puerto Ricans. In other words, the label that is used by political parties to extract the vote from those individuals, people don't identify as much with the term Latino or Hispanic as they do with the national origin.
Yeah, the reality is too is that there are some common themes. Education is one that probably cuts across. But then in addition to that, there are some very unique issues to each particular population. And oftentimes I think everybody assumes that immigration, for example, is an issue that's going to appeal to every Latino, and it's not true. The reality is, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, most Latinos in this country now, Hispanics are second generation, third generation, fourth generation, and the further you go along, the less they remember about how they got here to this country, and how their parents got here, and how their grandparents got here, and so forth. And so as a result, they lose that, and too often, we find some of the political parties really focused in on issues that are not as relevant to the community as a whole, or they touch upon issues which are relevant to them as a party, but they strike our community in very, very different ways. Other types of social issues like policing. The reality is a lot of our folks are in law enforcement. Especially in a state like Texas.
And military.
And military, exactly. So there is a lot of pride in that. And so as a result, if you attack that, that's going to impact in a much different way with different populations there. My wife, Sonia, who's with me here tonight, her focus is education. She has her doctorate there. So that is a very wide appealing issue that can bring in.
And they felt that Trump spoke to them on that front. And I think that area, especially maybe with like newer immigrants or just small business owners, which we are, there's a lot of us. We make up a lot of small business owners, right? That appeals to them. Also, I think abortion is a huge issue. It is, like many Catholics, Christians, it is. But it's also generational. I think you see like younger Latinos, Latinx, I don't think it's that significant. And I think it's more economy, jobs, healthcare. Education is still huge.
It's not based on race all the time, it's based on human, issues.
But I do believe, maybe one of the few, I do believe that we can get to a point where we do have a true sense of Latinidad, which is a sense of a common connection with all Latino demographics. When we converge, I think there's going to be more of that as we get bigger, as we get older, as we advance. You're going to see more of that. And within that, as with anything else, within that unity, there's going to be more political power.
Okay, we have time for one more question before we enjoy the mariachis. Yes, sir? Your name, please?
Gabriel Gómez. I kind of want to add to the question, like Fred Gómez saying about the president. Y'all say the staff is rising in the White House for Latinos, but y'all said there won't be a president most likely in 15 years for a Latino. But how long do you think it would take for a Latino to be president? That's just my question.
That's great, thank you.
25 years.
25 years, Enrique?
I was the one saying 15 years, so I'm saying that. And by the way, I think we're related. Your last name, you're my cousin, right? No, I think it's going to happen within 15 years. I do. I do think that there's going to be some changes in the next couple election cycles. That's going to swing back.
Mercedes?
I think it's in between. I don't think it's going to take that long, hopefully. I think we're going to see it earlier. And I agree that because to my surprise, I've really experienced this myself coming to the US. There is that sense of community. We all feel proud, I think, when a Spanish-speaking author brings the Nobel Prize, whichever nationality it is. When Vargas Llosa won the Nobel Prize, everybody was happy, I guess, across the Americas, including the Latino Americans here. I think it's going to happen, but it's also going to be complicated because of what you described before, that the vote is divided, and people will have to be addressed on those issues that you described before. So, beyond the stereotypes, beyond the things that unite us, they're going to have to address the actual issues that matter for those communities. And then, in that case, they might be able to change their vote, even though they might have normally voted Republican or normally voted Democrat.
We have two examples, Julian Castro and Bill Richardson, that ran for president in this country. And it's the primary issue. You have 10 or 12 other
Democrats.
people. Democrats.
Right. Marco Rubio also. Yeah.
Marco Rubio. Excuse me, thank you for correcting me. But the primary is going to get rid of them because there's going to be so many people spread out in 10 or 12 different candidates at the primary level, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would say there's been a big increase in presence, or it's changing and it's evolving and so forth. As much as I would like to have it within 15 years, I think it's going to take us a little bit longer because even today, with as big a population as we are in this country, with 60 million people of Latino Hispanic descent, we only have 5 Latina U.S. senators. And of that, we only have 1 woman that are Democrats. And I don't think we have any Republican Latinas.
Rubio and
Rubio, I'm sorry, yeah. I kind of blanked them out, but yeah, you're right. That's right, they're there. But, in terms of us getting there, it's going to be, we have a lot of challenges to surmount. To be able to do that.
Well, I do hope so. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for the 15-year mark, if not sooner. But yeah, I do feel like it will take a little bit of time, and slowly there'll be, more congresswomen, congressmen that are representing the Latino community, and hopefully more senators.
Is there another question? Rosendo?
This is for all of you. What do you think will be the uniting message for that Latino president, or that Mexican president, Hispanic president, in those 15 or 20 years? What do you think the most important issue that will bring somebody to that presidency?
I can unify the country. And by that I mean is that we will have by that point significant history of both people being Republicans, being independents, and being Democrats. And the Latino community will be split maybe a third, a third, a third, okay? So that they can rely on this political history over the next 15 years to unify the country politically.
Anyone else?
I think it's hard to predict. I think but I think at one point, I mean, it's, I don't know what's gonna happen like a year from now politically. That's a lifetime. That's just like, But I do think that it is important, going off what he just said, I think it's very important that that person will eventually have to bring together some, not just like maybe the one demographic where they're from, perhaps. It won't just have to be, if they're Mexican American, it won't just be Mexican Americans who will vote for them. They'll have to pull in Cuban Americans, Puerto Ricans, whomever else that has a big political bloc. And I think you're also seeing the demographics change in South Florida, even though Trump won big and there's like a lot of Republicans there. I think Latino-wise, you're seeing the demographic change. And I think keep an eye on that, because Florida, it's always Florida. I was there for 6 years. Florida's crazy, but it's so much fun. But it's fascinating politically. Watch Florida.
Arturo?
I think that, and I learned this from Cesar Chavez, in the sense that a Latino, Latina that's going to put themselves in that particular position has to make sure that they don't become identified as a Latino or Latina. That they don't eliminate everyone else within the population. And, there was times when I was angry when Barack Obama was running, because of the fact that, it seemed like he stepped away from being who he was, an African American, yet, he knew that he had to appeal to a much broader population than African American. So I think that that person that's going to be successful has to make sure that they're not solely identified because of who they are in terms of Latino, Latina. And as I mentioned, Cesar, he never wanted to be characterized, and there was many people that wanted to put him as a Mexican leader, as the Mexican-American leader within our country. And he said, no, there's no way I'll do. My focus is farm workers. And farm workers has to appeal much broader than just to the Latino, Hispanic community in our country, the issue of farm workers. And so and I grew up in the Chicano days and the hell-raising days and all that kind of stuff. But it really taught me a lesson in terms of if we want to be successful in this country, we have to go beyond our own culture. Not lose it, but we have to appeal to people beyond our culture.
Aida, do you have anything?
I couldn't have explained it better myself.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to reclaim my time and ask one question that has come to mind based on two things. One, a conversation that I've had with Mercedes, and then it also came about when we were discussing how long before we have a Hispanic or Latino president. So the question to you all is, do you think increased media coverage of who we are, what we can be, will that shorten that time frame or lengthen it when we next see a Latino or a Latina president? Does media play a role in that timeline?
I would argue that it will shorten it, given the caveat that Arturo just mentioned, in that individual is a legitimate person that has a policy platform across issues that are not strictly just Latino issues.
Mercedes?
I think it will shorten it, but it also depends on how that media coverage is reflected. So I think that's why it's so important that it reflects the reality, that it reflects the facts that are perhaps lesser known than the facts that we've spoken about today, the economic potential, the fact that Latinos are the main small business owners in this country, that their average number of degrees has doubled in the last 10 years, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it is important to widen the coverage that is done at the moment.
Finn, you're on the hot seat.
On the hot seat, yes. As I think my outlet, CBS, is incredible. I think that we do a great job with Latino Latinx stories. I do believe that overall, there should be more stories about Latinos and Latino community, and not just during Hispanic Heritage Month, but like Hispanic Heritage Year, 20% of the population, and there should be more of that. I do also believe, and this is very important, I think, because of the rise of smaller outlets that maybe fill a void that's not there, that you're seeing more of, where you see like Latino-owned, Latino-focused entities that have arisen, like Latino Rebels being one of them, and others who kind of like fill that void. You're going to see that more. Are you going to see that? And people, I think, are not just going to go to your traditional sort of sources of media. I think it's going to be more diverse in how they get their information as well. And I think that's going to play a role. So keep an eye on that.
Arturo?
Yeah, I think it would have a huge impact. I mean, my wife Sonia and I spent 5 hours today at the African American Museum. It's phenomenal. I mean, and we only saw half the museum. And even that half we saw very quickly because obviously we knew we had to come here. And we don't have anything like that for Latinos, for Hispanics in this country. And yet, we've been here, for generations already. And so there is not the in-depth knowledge about who we really are in the Hispanic community and the contributions that we've made and the sacrifices that we've made and the military honors that our, fathers and uncles and grandfathers and so forth. People don't know that. They don't have that understanding and experience in terms of who Hispanics are, who Latinos are, and that's sorely, sorely needed in our country for us to continue to advance. And so I think the media plays a huge role. And hopefully we get a lot more fins. Not only, we can't only have Univision and Telemundo. We need the ABCs, the NBCs, the CNNs, all of those media, as well as all the other forms of media that are out there, really talking about the Latino Hispanic experience in our country. And so that people can become aware, they're not threatened by us, that they feel comfortable, they see that we're here for the same purpose. I mean, I'm amazed at the students that are here from San Angelo, Texas. For those of you that don't know, San Angelo is not a big community. And yet to see, yeah, exactly, it's a very tiny community. But to see 6 students coming here to Washington, D.C., my God, when I was growing up in school at that age, never would that have ever happened. And so it's really great. And then to see you guys asking questions, man, I would never ask a question like that in front of an audience. That's fantastic. So it gives me a lot of hope in terms of where we're going as a community within our country. And I think the media will do tremendous wonders to really help influence that and to make it grow even faster. So glad you're there, Feed.
Aida, you have the last word.
Well, actually, that subject came up last night about having a Hispanic museum, because it's very true. We do not have one here in DC. So I just thought that was funny. I do feel like Univision and Telemundo are changing. I feel like it's targeting more. I know some of my friends that don't even speak Spanish do watch Univision and Telemundo, and they love it. I think not just in sense of TV, but I believe in social media. I feel like that will play a big role, at least in future years.
Very well. Thank you very much for being here, panel members. I appreciate your time. I treasure your wisdom, and we are going to be able to share that with the globe. In about 7 days, I'm told that the tape will be edited and will be made available. Certainly the Arts Club is going to share it among the members, and I will send to each of you the link to this event. Please share it with your friends and ask them to share it with their friends, and so on and so on. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I think it's time for a little mariachi music.
bonito es volar a las 11 de la noche, a las 11 de la noche. Ay, qué bonito es volar, ay mamá, para venir a quedar en los triantes de un coche, en los triantes de un coche. Hasta quisiera volar, ay mamá, me agarra la bruja y me lleva al cuartel, me vuelve maceta y me da de comer. Me agarra la bruja y me lleva a su casa, me vuelve